You ever wonder if a bad memory, like a really painful one, leaves a physical mark? Not a scar you can see, but an actual, tangible strain on the very architecture of your mind? Well, today, we are diving deep into a truly fascinating concept that tried to do just that. I mean, think about it. What if we could actually put a number on mental distress? A single figure that could show us not just that you're hurting, but the literal shape of that hurt inside your brain. It sounds a lot like science fiction, but that is the exact idea we're going to unpack today. So, our story kicks off in Zurich, way back in 2048. A group of scientists, sort of straddling the line between neuroscience and physics, they announced something pretty wild. And the rest of the scientific world, they pretty much laughed them out of the room, calling it pseudoscience. They claimed they could measure the invisible. They called it the Disturbance Index, or DI for short. Now, the theory behind it was that our memories aren't just random static. They're organized in these beautiful, intricate, repeating patterns called fractals. The DI was designed to measure what they called residual strain, the lingering echo of trauma or stress that physically bends and breaks these super delicate mental structures. And the analogy they used to explain it is just brilliant. They said, a healthy mind's memory fractals are like nested shells, harmonic, geometric, perfectly repeating. But under serious strain, those beautiful patterns shatter. They become like broken snowflakes, all jagged, asymmetrical, and chaotic. You can literally see the difference between a mind at peace and a mind in distress. So you're probably asking, how on earth did they measure this? Well, it wasn't just one thing. The DII was actually a mashup of 3 different streams of data. First, they mapped the geometric harmony of brainwaves. Then, they scored the level of chaos in the brain's recurring activity patterns. And finally, they measured how quickly the brain could adapt and how that process kind of bent the geometry of memory itself. And all of that complex data got fed into this formula right here. Now, don't worry, there's not going to be a math quiz. Think of this less as an equation and more like a secret recipe. It took those 3 really complex measurements and cooked them down into one single powerful number, a score that could tell the hidden story of what was really going on inside someone's mind. Of course, a theory, no matter how elegant, is just talk until you put it to the test. So what happened when the Disturbance Index met its very first human patient? The stakes could not have been higher. This is Miriam. She was suffering from a really severe treatment-resistant depression. For years, doctors had tried everything, but every single standard brain scan, every conventional test, it all came back with the same incredibly frustrating result. Nothing unusual. Her immense suffering was completely invisible to all their existing tools. But the DI saw something else entirely. Just look at this. A healthy baseline for this particular score is around 0.86. Miriam's score? It was 0.42. It had completely collapsed. For the very first time, her deep internal struggle was made visible. It was quantifiable. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a measurable structural disturbance. And this is where the story gets absolutely incredible. Using her DI score as a kind of roadmap, her doctors tried a totally new therapy, one designed specifically to reharmonize her brain's fractal patterns. The very first change they saw was in her dreams. These recurring nightmares she'd had for years of collapsing staircases, they turned into dreams of steady, stable bridges. And then her waking life started to follow. She could focus again, her relationships began to heal, and a part of her she thought was gone forever, her love for painting, it came back. Now, Miriam's recovery should have been this huge universal triumph, right? But it wasn't. The scientific community basically split right down the middle. You had one camp that was hailing the DI as this revolutionary bridge between physics and psychiatry, the future of medicine. And then the other camp, well, they were deeply skeptical, dismissing the whole thing as fractal mysticism, just clever math that didn't really mean anything. The lab in Zurich knew they needed more proof. They had to show that Miriam's case wasn't just a one-off fluke, but that the DI was a versatile tool that could read the subtle, unique signatures of many different kinds of minds. And that led them to create the DI casebook. Okay, let's just quickly run through this. You see 4 very different cases here. There's an architect with temporary depression. His DI score only dipped a little and bounced right back. But then you have a teacher with chronic depression, and her score showed a severe structural collapse that never really fully recovered. And then there were the real surprises. And this is the absolute key takeaway from the whole casebook. The disturbance index was proving to be so much more than just a simple sick or healthy meter. Its real power was in its nuance, its incredible ability to map a whole spectrum of human consciousness. This really shows you the range it had. Yeah, the DI could tell the difference between temporary strain and chronic, lasting damage. But it also started identifying things nobody was even looking for, like a unique signature for highly creative states. And in one case, it even picked up on a tiny anomaly that turned out to be an early warning for Parkinson's disease, months before any physical symptoms showed up. And let's go back to that creative state for a second. A composer came in, right? He was having these intense bursts of creativity, but also insomnia. His DI showed extremely high strain, but it wasn't the chaotic, destructive kind. It was productive. This was a total game changer. It suggested that some states we might label as abnormal weren't a bug in the system at all. Sometimes they were a feature, maybe even the very engine of innovation. So how does a tool go from being dismissed as total pseudoscience to becoming a new medical compass? The DI's journey is a perfect example of how a radical idea can, with enough time and evidence, become the standard. Just look at this incredible 50-year arc. In 2048, it's basically a joke. By 2055, after Miriam's case, it has its first powerful success. By 2070, with all the casebook data to back it up, it's being used in clinics all over the world. And 50 years after it was invented, in 2098, it was being taught to every single medical student as a fundamental tool, just like we study cholesterol today. In the end, the true legacy of the Disturbance Index was this. It forced specialists to finally see that ideas like fractals and attractors and residual strain, they weren't just poetic metaphors for how the mind works. They were real, physical, measurable patterns of a living brain. It gave us a whole new language to describe our inner worlds, and it leaves us with one final thought. What other invisible patterns are out there right now, just waiting for the right tool to finally be seen?